Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, Alan Bourgeois, and I have a gentleman who has an interesting background. I'm not going to massacre his last name because I know what it's like with my last name. His first name is Jim, and Jim, welcome, and if you would please say your last name.
My last name is Mosquera, and if you were saying it in Spanish, my native language, you would say Mosquera.
Okay. So there's a joke there that I just heard, but I'm going to let it go for now. So welcome, Jim. We appreciate you being here. You have a background where you actually grew up in Panama, and you came here to the States and you did education, and your education is quite interesting because it's multiple aspects. So first off, let's start with, why did you come to the States?
My parents emigrated to the United States, as you indicated, from Panama. My dad was a physician, and his best friend, I think, from medical school happened to relocate to not Miami, like a lot of people from Panama would go to Miami emigrating from Panama, or not New York City or Chicago. It was actually St. Louis, Missouri. So that's why we landed in St. Louis. Okay.
And so in Missouri, you actually got a master's in industrial engineering. Why that subject?
That's a great question. You know, I probably faced a similar challenge that many high school seniors face, which is, you know, what the heck am I going to do when I grow up and become an adult and make a living? I was good at math, pretty decent in science, and it just seemed like a decent fit to go into engineering. I thought that would be something that I could potentially parlay later into potentially business school or something of that nature. If I had to do it again, I might actually go into law school. So.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned mathematics that you're good at, which then brought you to another industry, which I also found interesting because, of course, your books are related to that, and that is global finance and the stock market and stuff. So going from industrial engineering to the stock market, basically, why the switch?
Well, when I graduated from college, I actually went into a field that had absolutely nothing to do with my degree. I actually went into telecommunications, for which there was no training really at the time to go into telecommunications. And the data networking spaces, which is really where I carved a lot of my career, was in its very nascent stages. And I really carved a lot of my career at the start of what you would consider the internet age, which would be, you know, early to mid 90s. While I was working, I had a very, very strong interest and passion in all those things, financial and economic, and I started trading commodity futures for my own account, had success with it. So throughout what I call my working career, my paying career, I was always very, very close to the financial markets and the commodity markets. And that knowledge that I garnered in those areas was all self-taught, which I think was important because, you know, it makes you appreciate it more. It's not that somebody says, okay, you got to go to college and do these things. I mean, it's like I'm building my own curriculum. I'm not taking any tests, obviously, although when I did pursue something called the Series 3 examination to become a commodity trading advisor, you actually do have to take a test for that. But again, most of my professional career, I always had something on the side, which was, again, this kind of self-study and trying to garner more knowledge to become a better trader. And then over the course of time, it developed into a much broader understanding of the financial markets and our economy. And then in my last nonfiction book, it actually started to delve a little bit more into the impacts on the political scene based on financial markets and economy that a lot of people really don't see.
And one of those things that people didn't see, which I was impressed to read, was that you were discovering in the 90s not only the internet aspect of the stock market and stuff, but the bubble that was soon to crash. You were actually telling people to pull the money out of the internet, tech stocks, because of that, correct?
Yeah, and I did have a little bit of a front row seat for that because I was involved again in the internet technology boom of the late 90s and up until 2000. What I did for a living was completely overlapping in that segment. But more importantly, it wasn't even so much the technology, because the technology was, again, somewhat in its nascent stages, but nevertheless, you knew when you were in this industry that was a technology and really whole business segments that were going to develop and flourish from that. But more importantly, what I recognized, Alan, was the psychology of the investors during that time frame. And something that's very, very common in financial bubbles is kind of this sense that you can't lose, that there's easy access to credit, and that money is easy to come by. Investment gains are easy to come by. And when I started to see that from people that were in my industry, people with whom I worked, I could tell that we were definitely at a cusp of something significant.
And so you use that information with your first book, if I understand correctly, Escaping Oz, correct?
Yeah, Escaping Oz, Protecting Your Wealth During the Financial Crisis was a book that I published in 2010. That was the first of 3 nonfiction books that I published that, again, kind of go into the financial markets, the economy, how it impacts societies, some of the things that we need to do as a society when we get through the next financial crisis. Because when I wrote the first one, it was slightly after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And I knew that we hadn't fully, let's say, progressed through the resolution of that. We still haven't. And so it was really, the first book was kind of a foray to get people prepared for that.
So you have Escaping Oz, and then you have the follow-up Escaping Oz and Observer's Reflections and stuff. Now, if I understand correctly, you did the Escaping Oz in 2010, but then you revised it and put out a updated version in 2015. Am I reading that correctly?
No, that's exactly right. In 2010 was the first book. Late 2010, early 2011. 2015, I published the second version of it, which was called another Escaping Oz version. And then the third book came in 2017, which was, as you mentioned, Escaping Oz and Observer's Reflections. The second book, what I did a little different in the second book was I included segments on there was one chapter that I thought was really, really important. And the chapter was called, What Do You Want Government to Be? And that really was the basis of what I created in the third book, Escaping Oz and Observer's Reflections, which is to kind of understand that difference between freedom from and freedom of. And because we've really not understood that, and politicians have very much catered to our need for the freedom from, we've gotten ourselves to the point where we are today. And I explained that in more detail in Escaping Oz and Observer's Reflections.
Okay. Excuse me. You've ended up creating the nonfiction books, which Chandler Scott books, and you have a series, I believe 3. This in itself sounds like an interesting aspect. So why did you create that book?
Well, the Chandler Scott series, I actually started writing the first one in late summer, early fall of 2015. And I say that because the title of the first book in the thriller series is called 2020. And the reason it's called 2020, because the first book is kind of centered around the U.S. presidential election of 2020, which, as you know, in real life is coming up in about a year and a half or so. And I wanted people to, I tell people that because it's not like I wrote that book with present characters in mind. So you won't say, okay, here's the current president of the United States. Is he embodied within any of the characters in my book? No, he's not. But it's really a much more important book to really show, because of what I wrote about in the nonfiction books about financial markets and the potential for crisis is, what happens in government, particularly the United States, when you have kind of this intersection of politics and economics, and then the economics part being the financial crisis. How will government react during that time frame, during those circumstances? And it's something that I really give people an observation, if you will, on how those things might progress, and then throw into that, cyber terror, throw into that cryptocurrencies, which I discuss now in real life, throw into that politics, throw into that the protagonist being a journalist, throw into that a presidential election, and then some of the things that happen after that. And then, after the first book, you get into more significant, let's say, reaction issues that occur within the United States. And if I can make one more comment, if you look at the covers of all 3 of my books, you will notice that the United States flag is represented in all 3 of the books. It's just represented in different states of disrepair. And it's very important for people to know when they read the series is that this book is about the United States. And my vision that I articulate throughout the book is not that the enemy of the United States is outside the geographic boundaries of the United States. These enemies are within, and our conflicts are within. So that's why everything thing is embodied within, you will see the United States.
And just so the listeners understand, the first book is entitled 2020. That's all there is to it. The second book is Rebellion, and the third one is Division. And in the covers, yes, it's clearly illustrated that there is the American flag in some form, some way illustrated. Out of the 2020, I'm curious, since, I mean, you wrote it in 2015, so that was before Trump and all this other stuff. Are you seeing anything that you wrote coming to fruition or becoming reality?
Yeah, actually quite a few things. Some of them have manifested more in the second book, Rebellion. Rebellion, by the way, is Latin for the word rebellion. So that shows you what happens in the second book. There's a rebellion based on what happened in the first book. Some of the things related to what you've seen with respect to Facebook. I never mentioned Facebook by name in the book because I didn't want to cite them, but there is a parallel to Facebook that I came up with, and I called it Connections. So that's the Facebook in my book. There's also things with digital currencies. So the revelation of, or the hacks, if you will, that have occurred on Facebook, they are mentioned, if you will, in the second book, in Rebellion, in this other fictional social app that I call Connections. There's another search engine that I talk about that's not called Google. It has a completely different name. And you see the effect of technology in revealing some of the privacy aspects that that people cherish. You see that. You see the work of domestic intelligence agencies in trying to ferret out, let's say, domestic people that they're creating domestic unrest, if you will. So those are some of the things you see there. On the political end, you will, without spoiling too much of the first book, you will see, I will just tell you that in the first book, you will see not just the Republicans and the Democrats running for president, but you'll see a couple other third parties that I created. And when I say third parties, I don't mean like today you have maybe a Libertarian Party that runs for president or a Green Party. These are parties that have already made a significant impact on the American society. They hold seats in state offices. They might be senators or Congress people already from respective states. They just don't have that full national profile yet, but yet they've managed to nominate 2 candidates for president. One of the parties is called the Theocracy Party. You can imagine what that party might stand for. And ironically, look at what's happened here in the last couple of months, or actually last month, with respect to the Roe v. Wade controversy. And I was telling my wife the other day, wow, we may get a theocracy party yet out of this that I've come up with. The other party is called the Independent American Party. And that party you would equate to, maybe somebody like if Thomas Jefferson were running for president today, he would be part of that party. And the reason I created those 2 political parties is because I've seen a fracture within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I've seen that occurring just kind of slowly over time. So I thought, why not create these 2 other parties that were people that were originally Democrats or Republicans and decided, you know what, I want to do my own thing now, so let's split off and let's create our own parties. And again, not just to run for president. I want to make sure everybody understands that. These are people that will be part, much like you might see in Europe, right? Parties that, you will see them every day of the week and, represented in the states, Congress, Senate, what have you. So I would say in that regard, what I'm seeing today within the Democratic Party, there's some fracturing that's occurring there because, you have one wing of the party that wants to pull one way, the old leadership wants to pull in the other direction. We know what happened in 2016, that the Republican Party wasn't particularly enthusiastic about electing the president. You had the Never Trump movement. That shows you that's a very, very significant fracture that is occurring there. So the vision in the book, if you will, again, it's fictional, right, is that, hey, there's some dissatisfaction within the ranks of the 2 primary parties, so you have people splitting away from that. And that, I would say, sets really a big, big theme for what happens throughout the series.
So we're going to stop you right there because there's a lot to unpack in the next section. We're going to let our sponsors do their thing. We'll be right back.
Hi, Brakefield and Berkey here, award-winning authors for the Techno Thrillers books, the Enigma book series. Technology, today's weapon of choice, the cyber good guys versus the cyber bad guys.
We invite you to join our website, theenigmaseries.com, where you will get sample chapters, sample audibles, book trailers, and you can sign up for our mailing list. The books are available in ebook, paperback, and Audible. Thank you.
Tom Gromes, father of market intelligence, writing business books that are a game changer. International author of nonfiction, has written the first and only books on the collapse of Russia and the first and only book on market intelligence. Check them out at mkintel.org. That's mkintel.org, mkintel.org. Hi, this is Alan at Ask Alan Anything, a podcast designed to help you learn about publishing and marketing your books. So join us live on Facebook at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time. The page is Indie Beacon Radio. Ask any questions about publishing and marketing your book. We're here to help you, and we've been doing it for a long time. So I hope to see you then. Thanks.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
And welcome back. This is your host, B. Alan Bourgeois. We are on Dear Texas Radio, which is the old name of the organization. This radio show is called Indie Beacon Radio, and I appreciate you being with us. We have Jim Mosquera, who's with us. He has an interesting background that he's been able to use very well for his books. And we were talking about a series of books known as the Chandler Scott series. And I understand correctly that Chandler Scott is the reporter who's discovering all these things. So I'm assuming Chandler is a financial reporter. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chandler starts out his career working for an international news network called El Mundo, translated Spanish meaning the world, and it's based out of Argentina. And you're correct, he is a financial and political reporter. And so he's traveled around the world seeing different things, and now the story kind of returns to the United States and what he has to find out there.
So that brings up the question, because we see ourselves as part of an international global market, but you're focused in on the United States. Is there a reason you didn't choose to go to the other part of that equation, the world market?
Well, in the first book, Chandler does have a couple of scenes where he's in Buenos Aires, Argentina, another one where he's in Spain, in Barcelona, in Madrid. And part of the reason I took him there was because, well, the network is based in Argentina. I took him to Barcelona because of a separatist movement that has been kind of brewing there for a long time in the area, in the Catalan province. And that's important because it actually comes up in the third book, something important that happens in the United States. But yeah, the reason I didn't focus on anything outside the United States, because I really want the readers just to think about it as this is a United States issue. United States obviously being the most powerful country in the world. And oftentimes, if you think about, what could defeat the United States, can a foreign power basically come into our shores and defeat us, militarily, politically? It would be quite a challenge, right? In the 1960s, we had something called mutually assured destruction with the Soviet Union, which basically meant, hey, if you push the button, we're going to push the button too, and that's the end of both of us. So I never foresaw any scenario like that evolving. The things that I see now are really more internal conflicts. And I think anybody that's watching the news today over the course of the last decade, or maybe even less, can see those internal conflicts that are continuing to develop. All I've done is I've thrown a little more chaos in there with, financial crisis, and then add the cyber terror mix. And then very, very important and intentionally why the main character happens to be a journalist.
Okay. I've often wondered whether or not, as you were talking about the war and different aspects of it, yeah, it would be very difficult to come in and, put boots on the ground type of thing. And I thought for China, for example, they could easily economically wipe us out because they own so much of our debt. Is any of that touched upon, the fact that we have so much debt that's owned by other countries?
The Chinese are mentioned in the book, but not exactly the way you're thinking about it. You would actually be surprised, I guess, at, some of the international influence that occurs in the book, and what happens when you have this what I'll call this somewhat final financial crisis in the United States, and some of the challenges, I guess, that the president and, and Congress and the government are facing to kind of restore order, economically and financially, and that the government actually gets help from an international organization that I made up. It's I called it the Global Settlement Bank. And these are like the central bankers of central bankers. So they're like the kings of all banking, and they have these high-powered consultants. And then there's an American that's working there, and he actually returns to the United States, being kind of like the guru to solve all these problems. And so there's some social messaging, some political messaging that's kind of there, not even so much under the surface, it's at the surface that I want to direct to people. It kind of shows what happens. Okay, you have this crisis. Here's how government's going to react, and that you may see actually influence from people outside of the United States on an international basis, because at the end of the day, the entire international community has to work together because you're still trading with other nations, commerce and so forth. So there is a solution that kind of pops up in the first book to some of this, some of these conflicts that are occurring, and it's actually a solution that I could foresee happening in real life at some point in our real future.
Now, Division is the last of the three. Do you have a fourth one coming out, or are you going to work on another project?
Well, honestly, I'd like to sell a lot more of the first three books. When I first started writing 2020, I had conceived that there was a storyline that would probably take 3 books to fulfill. I think I've done that successfully. What I'd like to do next, ideally, my nirvana, or my big Christmas present would be to have the book series produced, not on the big screen, but on a streaming service like Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, because I think it fits really, really well there. Some people have told me that I should read or watch the series, Black Mirror. I don't know that there's any strong parallels between that, but I think it struck a chord with some people. I just got through watching a series called Man in the High Castle that was on Amazon, which I thought was a really good series. That's a series that you'd probably never see on network TV. Probably wouldn't see a movie out of it, but it has a really, really strong following, within Amazon, and it's got very, very high ratings as a series on IMDb.com. So that's kind of the vision that I had, is because there's so much demand, for content, and this is a particular series that I haven't seen anything out there that's kind of done it the way I've done it. So I think that's probably where it would fit well in a streaming series.
Well, here's a tip for you. There's a company called Story Rocket that combines both the author and the producers of shows of that nature. So you might want to check them out. They're really good.
It's all my books are on there.
Great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Michael and the team would appreciate that. So that's good. So since you're pretty much wrapped up with that, what do you have in the future plan?
Well, it's a really good question. I've been spending more time trying to market the books, obviously, because, for those like yourselves and others that are authors, it's probably the most challenging thing I think I've ever done, is actually to market books. And I think I've done some challenging things in my life, but this has been definitely a great challenge. I still write a lot of articles, nonfiction, obviously, for financial journals. There are multiple storylines actually that I can conceive for the Chandler Scott series, especially when you read the ending of the 3rd book. You can see that there's more there. The story, I wouldn't say resolves itself. It does to some degree, but there's more there that can certainly be written, but nothing planned in the immediate future. Takes a lot of effort to put a thriller series together. It's one of the more difficult things I've done anyway.
You're absolutely right. I have a series as well, and I fully understand that. And with today's political aspects, with tariffs and all the other stuff going on, there's tons of stories waiting to be written there, I'm sure, and stuff, both fiction and nonfiction.
That's right.
The creative minds are going crazy.
Yeah, and that's why I think the thriller series that I wrote with Chandler Scott, it does, when people that have read it, especially the first book, they say, wow, this may be, and I know you're saying this is fiction now, but I could see it becoming nonfiction. And because of everything that's going on in the world today, and I say in the world, really in the United States, and some of these other elements that I introduce, which again, create more of the story, create more of the tension, and there's this constant tension that occurs between the state, government, and those people that are kind of resisting some of the things that government wants it to do. We've seen some elements of that, but my vision is that you're going to see even more and more of that. And that's regardless of what party's in power, by the way, whether a Republican administration or Democratic administration, you will see more of those, that strangulation, if you will, on, and not just so much from a personal freedom perspective, but on some rights, I guess, that we probably have as individuals, and the emerging kind of a parallel market that I've seen evolving in real life, but I also talk about it in the book, are people that are starting to get more involved in things like blockchain and cryptocurrencies, which for those that need more information, I definitely encourage more inspection and reading of that, because that's something that I talk about a lot in the second book. Really how people have really separated themselves from the economy in a way that for many people right now they couldn't envision. But when you hear the characters in the second book talking about and articulating that, it's like, hey, you know what? We don't need all this other stuff that's going on out here. We're going to kind of create our own economy separate of everything else. And you're probably wondering, well, how's that possible? And then, you can read about it in the book.
And that's a great plug. And we're going to stop right there and let our sponsors do their thing. We'll be right back. National Authors Day is November 2nd, 2019. This annual event is getting a fresh look with a parade that starts at the Texas State Capitol and works its way south down Congress Avenue. Join us as we celebrate the joy of being a published author and the joy of reading. For more information about the parade, merchandise, and other events related to this event, please visit our website at authors.dearindy.org.
What would you do if you found out everyone on the town council were thieves and murderers? That's what happened in Bandera, Texas in 1873. John Cruder was the marshal, yet he needed to operate outside the law in order to balance the scales of justice. He is the Midnight Marauder. You can find his books on Amazon.com and TopWesterns.com in paperback, digital, and audio. I'm Roy Clinton, and I hope you'll read The Midnight Marauder.
Thank you for watching or listening to this show. Indie Lector is proud to sponsor this programming. As a thank you for listening or watching, we would like to give you a 10% coupon code that you can use on our bookstore at indielector.store. Use coupon code video19. Again, that's indielector.store, coupon code video19 for a 10% discount on any purchase. Thank you.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
And welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, Alan Bourgeois. I have with me Jim Mosquera, who has written several books, both fiction and nonfiction. We've been talking a lot about the fiction aspect because, as odd as it is, they are relating to so much of what's going on in our world, even though they were written many years before things started going crazy. So with 2020, since that is the title of the first book of the fiction series, have you thought about sending copies to some of the people running for president?
No, but I wouldn't mind getting interviewed, like on the Today Show or something like that, where somebody could say, "Hey, you wrote this book," and no, I haven't. I've actually but I've sent emails, unsolicited emails, to people that maybe are somewhat involved in government, sometimes in maybe movie production and things like that. People that might have an interest in the topic, not so much from a political perspective, but some of the foundations of the book. But I haven't yet, though. But if anybody's out there watching, and wants a copy, let me know.
All right. Now, you mentioned earlier the difficulty in marketing for an author and stuff like that. So, off the top of your mind, do you have any words of encouragement for somebody who's thinking about being an author?
Well, I would tell you not necessarily to do it for financial gain. I always had a vision when I wrote these 3 books on the fiction side that, my ultimate vision was, I think I heard you saying this earlier in your intro about, there's less people that are actually reading today, than before. That's why I recorded the book so people could listen to them. It gives another avenue. But my ultimate vision was actually to have them produce in terms of a streaming series, because I think that's where it would make the most impact. And it would be very, very rewarding for me, obviously, if that happened. But I would definitely do it for pleasure. The marketing aspect, I can tell you that I have talked to many authors, and there is no one singular path to success. I've talked to authors that didn't even have a website that, they were very successful. I've talked to other authors that did a number of things. They weren't successful and they had on one thing. We all know what happened with J.K. Rowling, and her success, how she was, if you're familiar with Tom Clancy, the first book that he wrote apparently was not very good, and his publisher, somebody said, you need to cut out like more than half of it because it was way too detailed. Hunt for Red October. There is no one formula, and I say that as somebody that went to engineering school. Everything's mathematically learned to say if you do this, you'll get this. A plus B equals C. Well, there is no A plus B equals C in author marketing. I can tell you that pretty categorically.
Right. So we talked about the fact of marketing and of the screenplay and people wanting to reach out to you. So how can they reach out to you?
I would say the best way is to contact me via my author site, which is jimmosquera.com. So that's JIMMOSQUERA.com. That's got all my books there, and it has some links to other things that I've written on a nonfiction basis as well.
And of course, you're available in all the major bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all those.
All of those. Actually, I have, my first book, 2020, has been translated into Portuguese, and it's actually coming in Spanish very soon. And I also have all of the fiction books available on Audible as well, that
Right.
platform.
And if they wanted to reach out to you via social media to follow your progress with other books and projects, do you have anything for that?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is The Sentinel Man, TheSentinel, and then man. That's probably as good a place as any.
Great.
And professionally, I'm also on LinkedIn if somebody wants to connect with me professionally with what I do in my professional consulting career.
Great. Well, we are at the end of the show. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I do wish you the best of luck.
Alan, it's really been great being on with you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.